Good evening. It's Wednesday, August 26th. A teenage participant in a vigilante militia patrolling the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin during protests of the police killing of Jacob Blake shoots and kills two demonstrators. The state's attorney general lays blame for the youth's action at the feet of President Trump.
What we know is last night, with the fans of hate being flamed, you see these militia groups decide to take up arms and try to handle a situation on their own. And these sorts of instances, you can look back at President Donald Trump when he threatened gun violence. He even threatened to stick dogs on protesters outside of the White House.
Professional athletes, many of them African American, revolt over the latest police killing of a black man. A players' boycott cancels 3 NBA basketball playoff games, and the Milwaukee Brewers refuse to play tonight's Major League Baseball game at home. The rebellion may be spreading. San Francisco officials announced the closure of County Jail Number 4. After months of wrangling, the Hall of Justice facility will be shuttered just 9 days from now.
Although we thought we could do it, we knew that we would have to win people over to have them believe that actually this jail, which is deemed dangerous, hazardous, and also unfit for people to live in, that we could close this so quickly.
CAL FIRE officials report more progress in fighting Northern California's 3 major wildfires. Hurricane Laura barrels toward the Gulf Coast between Louisiana and Texas as a monster Category 4 hurricane, with 500,000 people under evacuation orders and a storm surge that could be 18 to 20 feet high when it hits landfall. Governor Gavin Newsom announces a $1.4 billion deal for a cheaper coronavirus test that will allow the state to eventually more than double the number of people tested to 250,000 a day. And the Trump administration considering the resumption of the testing of nuclear weapons. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Markle. CAL FIRE officials report progress in fighting the 3 major blazes burning around the Bay Area and Santa Cruz, crediting cooler weather and increased humidity. Officials have begun allowing people to return to the homes that they have evacuated, while state officials assess the damage of what is a brutal beginning to the California fire season. KPFA's Kate Eder reports.
Thousands of people in California returned home today as cooler weather and aid from multiple states helped firefighters gain ground and allowed authorities to lift some evacuation orders prompted by some of the largest wildfires in California history. Governor Gavin Newsom highlighted the unusually early fire season and said that more than 2,000 square miles have already burned this year. But Newsom said firefighters have made progress in battling 2 of the most destructive Northern California fires, the LNU complex in Napa, Sonoma, Solano, Yolo, and Lake counties, and the CZU blaze in San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties.
The LNU fire, the Lake Napa complex of lightning, today we've made real progress over a 48-hour period from 22% containment to 33% containment and kept the acreage relatively intact. CZU fire, which has generated a lot of stress for no other reason than in recorded history, we've never seen a fire this size and scope in this region of the state. And this is another testament of the reality of climate change in this state. On Monday, the CZU in that Santa Cruz area, 13% contained, 78,000 acres, kept it under 80,000 acres, making a little more progress on containment, 19%.
The LNU lightning complex has burned more than 557 square miles. It has killed 5 people, destroyed at least 978 structures, and damaged 256 more. More than 2,200 firefighters are battling the blaze, which is the 3rd largest in California history. Residents in Solano County have begun returning home, but some to no home at all. CAL FIRE officials said that 1,800 members of the California National Guard, who are trained to fight fires, will join in their efforts across the state. 250 of them will be sent to help battle the LNU complex. The CZU blaze in Santa Cruz and San Mateo is the second most destructive of the fires, with 1 person killed and 538 structures destroyed. It has burned over 125 square miles and threatens more than 24,000 structures. More than 1,600 firefighters are battling the fire. CAL FIRE Assistant Chief Billy C. says that today, firefighters will burn some of the area above Felton in Santa Cruz County to eliminate fuel and stop the wildfire from reaching the residential area.
Yesterday, we had great success out on the line. Today, we're going to be doing later this afternoon some burning operations to control that fire on our terms. We're going to be working diligently to secure that line over the next 24 to 48 hours and bring that down very safely and slowly into what we're going to consider a perimeter control, protecting these communities, locking that off.
Santa Cruz County officials reported that a woman who hadn't been heard from since Monday was found dead at home, apparently due to natural causes. They were also looking for an evacuee who went missing after telling a friend that he wanted to sneak back into a fire area. The SCU blaze is the region's largest at 570 square miles. It is burning in mostly unpopulated regions of Santa Clara, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Joaquin, Merced, and Stanislaus counties. The blaze has injured 5 people, destroyed 31 structures, and damaged 6 others. It is 25% contained. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District has extended its Spare the Air alert through Friday due to smoke and haze from the fires causing unhealthy air quality. But for California's agricultural workers, work doesn't stop even when they're in evacuation warning zones. West Marin resident Gina Tognini works at Star Root Farms, an organic farm in Bolinas, California, which is under an evacuation warning due to Marin County's Woodward fire. She says that the approximately 25 employees on the farm have 1 or 2 N95 masks each, and that air quality conditions can be difficult.
Well, after a little while, I was getting really nauseous, and everyone's eyes were stinging. I've heard other farm workers talking about their throats burning. Everyone is still working to feed this country while this fire is happening. Whether or not they have access to masks, I honestly think that people should have paid leave during times like these.
The Woodward fire, which is burning in the Point Reyes National Seashore, has burned around 4 square miles and is only 5% contained. CAL FIRE Chief Sean Kavanaugh warns that this year's fire season is far from over.
We're only in the third week of August, and as we know, we move in September, October. We keep talking about it here, the fire history here from the Kincaid fire last year was in October. The fires from the Alice and the Tubbs in 2017 in these areas were, in the October area. We are a long ways from fire season being over. And the strain and the pull on the resources throughout the entire state is really good to see these folks coming from out of state to help, because we do have a long fire season.
Washington, Oregon, Utah, Montana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Idaho are among the states that have sent resources to California to help fight the state's brutal blazes. Reporting for KPFA Pacifica Radio, I'm Kate Ida.
A California wildfire destroyed a sanctuary for the endangered California condor, and the fates of several condors, including a chick, remain unknown. The blaze began last Wednesday in Los Padres National Forest. By Friday, it had destroyed the 80-acre sanctuary in Big Sur that since 1997 has been used to release captive-bred condors into the wild. The nonprofit Ventana Wildlife Society of Monterey, which ran the facility, is seeking $500,000 in donations to rebuild it. One man was arrested on suspicion of arson in connection with the blaze. Hurricane Laura barreled toward the Gulf Coast at the Louisiana and Texas border as a monster Category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles an hour. 500,000 people are under evacuation orders. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards said Laura is expected to make landfall early tomorrow morning, but even before then, conditions would degrade to the point that evacuations would no longer be possible. He urged people who thought they could ride out the storm to think again.
We need everyone in southwest Louisiana paying very, very close attention to this storm and heeding the warnings that have been going out for a number of hours now. You're going to hear ranges of storm surge that we haven't heard in Louisiana since Hurricane Audrey in 1957. You're going to hear the word unsurvivable to describe the storm surge that we are expecting.
He said the storm surge could be 18 to 20 feet where it hits landfall. A similar message from Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who said local officials were reporting that many people were not heeding the evacuation orders. Abbott warned rescue operations would be impossible for about a 24-hour period before and after Laura makes landfall.
The hurricane is going to be quite severe, very powerful winds with a strong impact that I'll tell you more about shortly. The key, however, that I want to make right now is that for the areas in southeast Texas that will be closest to the point where the hurricane will come across the shoreline, those people still have only about 5 hours to evacuate. This has been categorized repeatedly as an unsurvivable storm surge where it will be hitting. And that storm surge could continue inland for about 30 miles.
Environmental groups are warning that chemical plants dotting the area will almost certainly be overcome by the winds and storm surge and spill a toxic brew into the local community. Hurricane Laura grew nearly 70% in power in just 24 hours to reach maximum sustained winds of 110 miles an hour with higher gusts fed by the warm waters of the Gulf Coast. Higher sea surface temperatures are one of the products of climate change that makes hurricanes more intense and more deadly. First Lady Melania Trump made the case for President Trump's re-election last night, portraying him as a fighter for the American people. After other speakers at the Republican National Convention gave short shrift to the coronavirus pandemic, Melania Trump noted that the lives of Americans changed drastically in March with the onset of COVID-19.
I know many people are anxious and some feel helpless. I want you to know you're not alone. My husband's administration will not stop fighting until there is an effective treatment or vaccine available to everyone.
Melania Trump spoke in the Rose Garden before a crowd of about 100 people, including the president, very few of whom appeared to be wearing masks or practicing social distancing. Last night's edition of the Republican Convention tried to portray a compassionate side to Donald Trump. Trump pardoned a formerly incarcerated person who was already released from jail and oversaw a naturalization ceremony for several immigrants in the middle of the television program. Although the Trump administration is trying to end almost all immigration, legal and illegal, to the United States. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo addressed the convention and the nation during an official overseas trip while he was in Israel. Lily Bolke filed this report.
I'm speaking to you from beautiful Jerusalem, looking out over the old city.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo broke ranks with American diplomacy the second night of the Republican National Convention. In remarks recorded during an official visit to Israel, he boldly praised Donald Trump's, quote, America First foreign policy. Professor Nicholas Grossman from University of Illinois says the administration has a pattern of violating diplomatic norms.
By appearing at a political convention, giving this recorded speech, and especially doing it from a foreign country, sends a signal instead that I represent Donald Trump and his political interests, as opposed to I represent the U.S.
The Hatch Act prohibits federal employees from political activity while on the job, and a House subcommittee has opened an investigation into Pompeo's political activities in Israel. Among other speakers, evangelist Billy Graham's granddaughter, Cissy Graham Lynch, appealed to religious voters questioning their past support of the president.
He supported religious beliefs in court. He ensured religious ministries would not be forced to violate their beliefs.
Kentucky's Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who's leading the investigation into the police killing of EMT Breonna Taylor in her home, mentioned her in passing.
He blanket criticized racial justice protesters and echoed other speakers, accusing Joe Biden of being, quote, captive to the radical left, unquote. Time to the convention, a group of former Justice Department and national security officials from the past 3 Republican administrations endorsed Joe Biden yesterday. Trump's children, Eric and Tiffany, spoke, and his wife, Melania. From the Rose Garden, she sent her sympathies to families of those who have died from the coronavirus and shared her experience of becoming a citizen.
As an immigrant and a very independent woman, I understand what a privilege it is to live here and to enjoy the freedoms and opportunities.
Again, mixing White House activities with politics, convention videos showed President Trump presiding over staged pardoning and naturalization ceremonies. Even though his administration has cut operations for processing citizenship applications that critics say will prevent soon-to-be citizens from voting. A woman whose son died in a collision with an undocumented immigrant, Marianne Mendoza, was dropped from the lineup last minute for retweeting a thread alleging a Jewish plot to control the world from a QAnon conspiracy theorist. She's since apologized. Yesterday, a bipartisan pair of congressmen introduced a resolution condemning QAnon. Trump himself has declined to denounce the fringe movement, saying he appreciates that its followers support him. Alex Kaplan is with Media Matters, a watchdog nonprofit. He covers QAnon.
It has ties to violence. I think it's concerning that someone seeking elected office would try to cultivate support from that or believe that, or both.
From Pacifica Network and Public News Service, I'm Lily Bolke. Thanks for listening.
And you are listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. Women earned the right to vote 100 years ago today with the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. On this Women's Equality Day, as it's known, how close to equality women have come in Arizona and across the rest of the country depends on who you ask. Mark Richardson reports.
A new Wallet Hub study ranks Arizona 5th highest among the states for women's equality. However, the World Economic Forum ranks the U.S. only 53rd out of 153 countries. Stephanie Troutman-Robbins, Director of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Arizona, says the divergent rankings help put things in perspective.
Being number 5 in a country that's number 53 is not amazing. So we're in a D state in an F country. Women's equality, essentially a D, is a high-ranking score for that. And that should bother us.
The Wallet Hub survey includes such factors as women's earnings, executive positions, work hours, levels of entrepreneurship, and political representation. The global study delves deeper and finds that American women still face a growing gender gap. While women have made strides in education and in the workplace, Robbins says the burdens of events like the COVID-19 crisis often fall more heavily on them and even more so in households of color.
To take on the role of educating and caregiving, I do think that where critical gains are made, the first groups to be hit by and still vulnerable to circumstances like COVID-19 for women and women of color.
Robbins sees the political arena as a bright spot, with more women running for and being elected to public office. She calls the selection of Kamala Harris as the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket a watershed event.
We're seeing a lot of interesting movement at the national level, and I do think we have women leaders in the state, and it'll be interesting to see if more women leaders, especially younger women of color, emerge in like a context such as Arizona.
She hopes that as more women are elected, such critical issues as affordable childcare, access to education, the earnings gap, and domestic violence will get more attention in public policy. For Public News Service, I'm Mark Richardson.
An anti-abortion activist who spoke at the Republican National Convention last night has advocated for something called household voting, saying wives should defer to their husbands on making decisions related to politics. Last May, Abby Johnson wrote on Twitter that she would support bringing back household voting, later explaining that if spouses disagree, then they would have to decide on one vote. In a godly household, the husband would get the final say. Johnson previously worked for Planned Parenthood, becoming a vocal abortion opponent after saying she quit years ago following an abortion of a woman who was 13 weeks pregnant. She founded a ministry that lobbies abortion clinic employees to leave their jobs, and a movie based around her life was released last year. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention quietly put up new guidance on its website that says asymptomatic people, even those with exposure to the coronavirus, need not be tested. The new guidance perplexed and alarmed outside public health officials. It raised the suspicion that the CDC was giving in to pressure from President Trump, who has frequently said the U.S. wouldn't have so many COVID-19 cases if it conducted fewer tests for COVID-19. Experts told the New York Times the new guidance was, quote, very strange, bizarre, and potentially dangerous. Appearing on CNN, former Baltimore Health Commissioner Lena Wen said asymptomatic people who've been exposed are precisely the people who should be tested.
I mean, imagine if you got exposed at work. You would want to know for your own family whether you have COVID-19 because you don't want to bring it back to your loved ones. And also, we need to know for public health purposes. We know that 50% of transmission could be caused by people who are asymptomatic. So why wouldn't we want this population to be tested? I think the CDC really needs to give a much better explanation. The entire process of how this was done in the middle of the night with no explanation, it just causes more confusion.
Nearly half of infected people are believed to be asymptomatic, but still capable of spreading the disease. The U.S. has suffered more than 178,000 deaths from COVID-19, more than 5.7 million reported cases. Governor Gavin Newsom today announced that California has signed a contract worth up to $1.4 billion with a company to provide a significantly cheaper coronavirus test that will allow the state to eventually more than double the number of people tested to 250,000 each day.
We are facing the prospects moving forward over the course of the next number of months of moving into flu season. Time for flu season, of course, puts tremendous stress and demand for testing. People that develop flu-like symptoms are going to understandably and likely request that they get tested not only for flu, but also get tested for COVID-19. In anticipation of some of the stress that will place on our testing system, in anticipation of addressing some of the existing and persistent challenges with getting timely test results, as well as providing the kind of access, the quality access that provides for a lens of equity in terms of the testing, we're moving now in a new direction.
California now averages about 100,000 tests a day, with the state paying $100 a test and results taking between 5 and 7 business days. Newsom said the state's contract with Massachusetts-based Perkin-Elmer will increase the state's testing capacity to 250,000 a day, with each test costing about $31. Results would come within 2 days.
We are demanding test results back within 24 hours, the latest 48 hours, and we have provisions in the contract to guarantee that turnaround time. You get in within 48 hours, certainly within 24 hours, then we have the ability to make decisions in real time that will advance our efforts to reopen our schools for in-person education, reopen our businesses in a more effective and efficient manner, in a more sustainable manner. And by the way, we'll be putting out those guidelines Friday in terms of the new strategies we are advancing as it relates to reopening based on some of the positive news that we will advance here in a moment in terms of our positivity rate and in terms of our hospitalizations and ICUs. But on testing, that's foundational. If we're going to sustainably reopen, we have to have the testing capacity. We have to have the results in a much more efficient period of time, allow us to make decisions on contact tracing, again, isolation, quarantine, and the like.
The contract will initially cost the state $100 million with a maximum amount of $1.4 billion. The goal is to begin processing tens of thousands of new tests by November and reach full capacity by March. California has had a relationship with Perkin-Elmer for 30 years. The company conducts newborn screening for the state and operates other genetic testing programs. Perkin-Elmer will use polymerase chain reaction diagnostic testing, which Newsom referred to as the gold standard. But the contract says the company can pivot to new testing technology once it becomes available. More California children with specialized needs, such as students with disabilities or those who are homeless, will be allowed back in classrooms even as most schools remain shut for in-person learning under new state guidance released yesterday. The new guidance would allow the return to school for some children in grades kindergarten through 12 and groups of up to 14 students. The limited return to school applies to students with disabilities, English language learners, children at risk of abuse or neglect, or students who are homeless. It's aimed at ensuring the students can access services like occupational therapy, speech and language services, and individualized education programs. A Superior Court judge has refused to immediately close classrooms at a private school in the Central Valley town of Reedley, which has defied state and local health orders aimed at slowing the spread of the coronavirus. Emmanuel Schools reopened its campus on August 13th. It has about 600 students. News reports showed students without masks and not practicing social distancing. Superior Court Judge D. Tyler Tharp denied a motion by county health officials for a temporary injunction, although another hearing is set for next month. Fresno is one of nearly 40 counties on a state monitoring list because of rising COVID-19 infection rates. The county was added to the list on June 8th. It has a higher rate of positive tests coming back than the state average and has reported 191 deaths. California has recorded nearly 12,400 deaths from COVID-19, including 138 yesterday. Unions and environmental groups are demanding the Trump administration use the Defense Production Act to get personal protective equipment to essential workers. They're still doing that. Andrea Sears reports.
An emergency rulemaking petition has been sent to the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security. It requests a nationwide inventory, increased production, and prioritized distribution of respirators, gloves, gowns, and other equipment needed to protect workers from COVID-19. Mickey Siegel de Hernandez is with Communication Workers of America, which represents healthcare workers. She says 6 months into the pandemic, there still are critical shortages.
This is well past when the DPA should have been used, making sure companies are able to produce the equipment needed and get it to the right places.
The petition was filed on behalf of 30 labor and environmental organizations nationwide. While some areas of the country have drastically reduced their rates of new infections, De Hernandez points out that the numbers continue to rise in other areas, especially in the South, the Midwest, and in California.
The pandemic is not over. We're not anywhere close to having it under control. And not only in healthcare are these supplies needed, but in other workplaces as well.
She adds, as long as the pandemic is spreading anywhere in the country, no one is safe from infection. Even in areas where the number of COVID patients has declined dramatically, De Hernandez notes the PPE supply for healthcare workers hasn't been restored to the normal standards of care.
The national government has still not taken the steps to make sure that we are protecting people as they continue to do their jobs. And without that happening, we're just going to see more and more workers sick and more workers die.
The petition, filed on August 11th, requests that the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security take the requested actions within 15 days. For Public News Service, I'm Andrea Sears.
A person who works at the California Capitol has tested positive for the coronavirus during the critical final week of the legislative session. Senate Leader Tony Atkins' office did not say if the case was a lawmaker or a staff member. The Senate delayed a scheduled morning session to vote on legislation. The legislature has already been delayed twice because of the coronavirus. Another delay could mean lawmakers will run out of time on high-profile issues, including extending eviction protections during the pandemic and several police reform bills filed following the death of George Floyd in May. Lawmakers must finish their work by this coming Monday. Cancer survivors are speaking out as they await the outcome of several lawsuits concerning radiation and cell phones. Suzanne Potter reports.
The suits challenge the Federal Communication Commission's radiation guidelines, the radio frequency or RF levels from cell phones, and safety notices required by the city of Berkeley. Courtney Kelly, a young mother who has beaten back breast cancer twice, says she used to keep her phone tucked into her bra, but not anymore.
I use headphones when I talk or speakerphone. I don't sleep with my cell phone near me. I never put my cell phone in a pocket or in my bra. I'm even uncomfortable with it in my purse next to my body. I try to keep it far away.
The cellular industry insists its products are safe, although a 2018 study by the National Toxicology Program concluded cell phone radiation causes brain tumors in rats. Orange County surgeon Dr. John West, who wrote a book on breast cancer called Prevent, Survive, Thrive, says he's seen multiple patients with no family history or genetic predisposition develop tumors near where they usually kept their phone. 55-year-old Callie Pavano had a fast-growing softball-sized tumor removed from her left leg. Now it has metastasized to her lungs, back, right leg, and her heart. A doctor told her it might have been caused by exposure to radiation.
And then I had an epiphany. My laptop. I put that on my left leg almost every day for hours. And then when I searched for the owner's manual for my laptop, there it was in black and white. Must be kept a minimum of 8 inches away from your body.
And 49-year-old Paul Griffiths, a father of 2 from San Jose, is fighting a brain tumor above the ear, where he says he used to squeeze his phone while taking notes on work calls.
First thing I thought of was like, oh, I bet you this thing is right above my ear on my right side, where I always feared, and lo and behold, that's exactly where it was.
For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast airing each night at 6. There's a half-an-hour edition on the weekends, and it's archived online at kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle.
Hi, this is Mitch Jeserich, inviting you to join us on this radio station for Pacifica's live coverage of the Republican National Convention, starting Monday, August 24th, and going through Thursday, August 27th, starting each night at 7 p.m. on the West Coast and 10 p.m. on the East. We'll have the main speeches, we'll talk to progressives, and yes, we'll talk to conservatives too, and we'll be taking your calls. So join us for Pacifica Radio's coverage of the Republican National Convention.
A white 17-year-old who was a huge fan of the police was arrested today in the killing of 2 people last night during a third night of protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, over the police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake. Kyle Rittenhouse was taken into custody 15 miles away in Illinois on suspicion of first-degree intentional homicide. A young white man believed to be Rittenhouse was caught on cell phone video opening fire in the middle of the street with a semi-automatic rifle. According to witness accounts and video footage, police apparently let Rittenhouse walk past them with a rifle over his shoulder as members of the crowd were yelling for him to be arrested because he had shot people. Simon Marks reports.
There are huge questions about why he wasn't arrested at the scene.
Hey, he just shot them! Hey, dude right here just shot them!
He was filmed walking towards police, his hands in the air, a long gun strapped to his chest, as protesters told police that he had just shot at them. Police either didn't hear or ignored those remonstrations and drove right past the teenager, who then departed the scene. He was arrested earlier today in a neighbouring town. The sheriff of Kenosha, David Beth, says he was part of a group of heavily armed young white men who wanted to be deputized as temporary law enforcement last night.
I think some people are thinking that I should deputize, we should have these people out there with guns under my authority. What a scary, scary thought that would be.
The issue of violence in American cities is sure to be raised at the Republican convention tonight, where Vice President Mike Pence is the keynote speaker. Simon Marks reporting.
In the wake of the killings, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers authorized 500 members of the National Guard to support local law enforcement around Kenosha, doubling the number of troops sent in. The governor's office said he was working with other states to bring in additional National Guard troops and police. President Trump said he's sending federal agents in. The FBI said it's assisting in the case. Christina Anastad has more.
2 anti-racist protesters are dead, and 1 is injured after a gunman opened fire on the protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The accused assailant is 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, a Trump supporter and a police supporter of the Blue Lives Matter movement, a pro-police movement created in response to Black Lives Matter. Witness accounts and video footage indicate the shootings took place in 2 stages. The gunman first shot someone at a car lot, then jogged away. As protesters followed him and tried to take his rifle, bringing him to the ground, he opened fire again.
Oh shit, he shot that guy in the stomach.
In another video, the gunman can be heard saying, "I just killed somebody." The accused 17-year-old gunman was one of several armed men that night, vigilantes, many in military garb, who traveled to Kenosha under the guise of protecting property after protests against the police shooting of 29-year-old black man Jacob Blake ignited fires, property destruction, and standoffs with police for a third night.
Looting, arson, Molotov cocktails, violence, persons injured.
Daniel Minskins is Kenosha's chief of police.
Last night, a 17-year-old individual from Antioch, Illinois, was involved in the use of firearms to resolve whatever conflict was in place. The result of it was 2 people are dead. This is not a police action. This is not the action, I believe, of those who set out to do protests. It is the persons who were involved after the legal time, involved in illegal activity that brought violence to this community. So last night, unfortunately, a 26-year-old Silver Lake resident and a 36-year-old Kenosha resident lost their lives to this senseless violence. A 26-year-old West Allis resident was also injured, but is expected to survive.
According to Kenosha County Sheriff, several of the armed vigilantes in Kenosha requested he deputize them. He said they had been patrolling Kenosha streets in recent nights. Video taken before the shooting shows law enforcement in military dress tossing bottled water from an armored tank to some of the armed civilians walking the streets, including the accused 17-year-old shooter. Law enforcement thanks them for being there.
Need water? Seriously, guys, far right. We need water. We need water. We'll do anyone. Thank you. All right, come on, guys. Let's get out of here. We got a couple. We got to save a couple, but we'll give you a couple. We appreciate you guys. We really do.
Thank you. Hey, can we go this way? Can we walk this way?
But Kenosha County Sheriff David Berth says he refused to deputize the vigilantes.
Part of the problem with this group is they create confrontation. The people walking around with guns, if I walk around in uniform with a gun, all of you probably wouldn't be too intimidated by it because you're used to officers having guns. But if I put out my wife with an AR-15 or my brother with a shotgun or whatever it would be walking through the streets, you guys would wonder what the heck is going on. That doesn't help us.
Armed gunmen at Black Lives Matter protests were not received well in Kenosha. In one video, they escalated tensions over what was more important, a black life or property. In this exchange between an armed military man and a Black Lives Matter protester in Kenosha.
The value of property has nothing to do with the value of life. If you value this shit, why are you fighting people you
Hey, sounds
Officials say Tuesday night's shooting shows the deep divisions in the community. People are protesting the police shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot point blank 7 times in the back by a police officer, paralyzing him as he tried to enter his car where his children were. He was reportedly trying to break up a fight between 2 women when officers intervened and shot Blake. The police shooting has spiraled, leaving 2 lives lost, other lives forever altered, including that of a minor, and a community rattled by deep divisions over racial tensions and injustice. Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes appeared on Democracy Now! And pointed the finger at President Donald Trump for encouraging violence against protesters with his rhetoric against Black Lives Matter.
What we know is last night, with the fans of hate being flamed, you see these militia groups decide to take up arms and try to handle a situation on their own. And these sorts of instances, you can look back at President Donald Trump when he threatened gun violence. He even threatened to sick dogs on protesters outside of the White House. If this is the message coming from the top about how to handle people who are, standing up and against racial injustice in this country.
The first night of the Republican National Convention featured remarks by Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the St. Louis couple who had been celebrated by Republicans for pointing their guns at protesters, simply marching by their home. The 2 faced charges over the incident. I'm Christina Onnested.
Professional basketball players made their strongest statement yet against racial injustice today when the Milwaukee Bucks did not take the floor for their playoff game against the Orlando Magic. The teams were set to begin Game 5 of their series shortly after 4 p.m., with the Bucks needing a win to advance to the second round. Players have been discussing boycotting games in the so-called Orlando, Florida coronavirus bubble after the shooting of Jacob Blake by police in Wisconsin. More discussions were expected today, but even before that, the Bucks apparently decided they would act. Some things are bigger than basketball, the team's senior vice president, Alex Lasry, tweeted. The stand taken today by the players in the organization shows that we're fed up. Enough is enough. Change needs to happen. I'm incredibly proud of our guys, and we stand 100% behind our players, ready to assist and bring about real change. Magic players and the referees were on the floor for the game, but Milwaukee never took the floor. Eventually, everyone else left. The Magic Bucks contest was to be the first of 3 scheduled playoff games today. The other 2 were eventually canceled. Later, the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team announced it would not play its scheduled home game against the Cincinnati Reds. The Women's Professional Basketball League also canceled its games today, and National Hockey League playoff games were also scrubbed. 2 weeks after Governor Gretchen Whitmer declared racism a public health crisis, there are calls for Michigan lawmakers to do something about it. Mary Sherman has that story.
A concurrent resolution introduced in early June would make the same declaration and commit the legislature to work with the governor to promote racial equity and justice. Senator Erica Geis, who co-sponsored the Senate version, notes the measures have since languished in committee.
The fact that it was sent to committees that will likely not take them up is, I think, the point about the question, Lansing, are you listening?
Geis adds COVID-19 has claimed the lives of a disproportionate number of people of color. She says the resolution would address the longtime disparities in healthcare access in marginalized communities. In the Department of Health, Behavior, and Education at the University of Michigan, Dr. William Lopez contends the pandemic has uncovered systems of segregation, incarceration, deportation, and low wages that have shaped the lives and health of communities of color.
And I think this becomes a multi-pronged approach for us. How do we add humanity to our communities so people understand that Black and brown families should be together and should be healthy? And given that our country discounts our lives, how do we simultaneously change the structure and take care of ourselves?
Romulus City Councilwoman Tina Talley says a collective effort is needed to reduce systemic racism.
We all have a part to play in this. We have the protesters out there diligently protesting on this matter with George Floyd. And now us as legislators, or whatever piece we have in this puzzle, we have to be willing to step up and do that. It's action time.
Along with Romulus and several other communities, the Wayne County Commission approved a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. Chairwoman Alicia Bell believes that's why the governor stepped up as well.
That's wonderful for us to say these words, but we need action and tangible outcomes. What are going to be the outcomes for our people? What are we going to see in the environment? What are we going to see in our health disparities? What are we going to see in water? What are we going to see in housing?
Governor Whitmer also recently signed an order creating the Black Leadership Advisory Council to review state laws that might perpetuate racial inequities and recommend measures to prevent discrimination. For Public News Service, I'm Mary Sherman.
And you're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings, we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m., right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
San Francisco Mayor London Breed, Sheriff Paul Miyamoto, and city officials have announced the closure of the maximum security facility for the Sheriff's Department, County Jail Number 4, located on the 7th floor in the Hall of Justice at 850 Bryant Street in San Francisco. Mayor Breed called the closure a significant step towards real reforms in the city's criminal justice system. The prison facility will close 2 months early on September 5th. KPFA's Karen Argood reports.
San Francisco County Jail Number 4 was built in 1961 and is the third jail that the city of San Francisco will have closed since 2010. Calling it a historic moment, Sheriff Paul Miyamoto says he was committed to closing the outdated and decrepit facility, which will be shut down in less than 2 weeks.
The facility consists of single, multiple occupancy cells, dormitories, all with barred concrete cell fronts. The jail used Alcatraz Federal Prison cell block lettering for its housing areas. The design has outlived its functionality, and since the 1990s, the San Francisco Sheriff's Office has grown and moved away from the use and form of management of these types of facilities to a direct supervision model with more humane infrastructure that provides for a humane, safe living environment without the use of bars. Closing a jail is a reflection of our continued commitment to changing the narrative of our justice system and look to reform and to helping others.
County Jail Number 4 has capacity for 402 beds and currently houses 77 people. Other San Francisco County jails currently have the capacity to absorb additional people in custody, says Miyamoto, and they're taking all the precautions to keep inmates safe.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, jail and prison populations have been especially vulnerable. While San Francisco County jails have not been immune from the virus, we have been a rare success story, working with everyone to limit exposure and prevent outbreaks in our system. We have and continue to develop prevention and safety protocols to intercept, control the virus, and keep everybody safe.
San Francisco Mayor London Breed calls the criminal justice system broken.
We have real problems with how sadly, disproportionately, when you talk about San Francisco, one of the most progressive cities in the country, with a less than 6% African American population, we still have almost 50% of the people who are incarcerated in this city are African American. We know disproportionately that we still have challenges. We still have issues with this criminal justice system. And now, here in this city, we are doing something about it. We are closing the 7th floor of 850 Bryant Street. And we're closing it because no human being should have to be there. We're closing the door on the past and mass incarceration at its absolute worst. And we're opening a door to a real change, to a new way of reforming criminal justice in San Francisco.
Bree talked about the conditions of 850 Bryant Street and her visits there.
Seeing people that I know, that I care about, from my community and their children in these jail cells that are small and tiny, 2 to 3 people in a cell. And we want them to have a better life. We want them to not lose it in a facility like this. How do we truly have the kind of facility that's going to change the hearts and minds of the people that we want to support? 850 Bryant Street is not such a facility. It is inhumane, it is nasty, it is dirty, it is filthy, and I wouldn't want to see my worst enemy in that place.
Inmates at the closing facility are expected to be moved to either County Jail Number 5 in San Bruno or County Jail Number 2 on 7th Street. The remaining administrative functions at 850 Bryant will be relocated by the summer of 2021. The closure of County Jail Number 4 is a part of the mayor's ongoing efforts to redirect funding from the city's law enforcement agencies to San Francisco's African American community. For Pacifica Radio, KPFA, I'm Karen Argood.
The American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit today alleging U.S. agents sent by President Donald Trump to protect the federal courthouse targeted by Black Lives Matter protesters illegally used excessive force and illegal detention to rob protesters of their freedom of speech and assembly. The lawsuit also alleges that the acting director of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, did not have the authority to send more than 100 agents to Portland, Oregon, because he was improperly appointed to the role due to the Trump administration's failure to adhere to succession rules. Plaintiffs include 3 military veterans, a college professor, several Black Lives Matter protesters, and a man who alleges he was snatched off a street blocks from the federal courthouse by unidentified agents. Almost all the plaintiffs allege physical injuries from getting hit by metal tear gas canisters, rubber bullets, pepper spray, and other chemical irritants. A video of plaintiff and Navy veteran Christopher David's encounter with U.S. agents outside the Portland courthouse circulated widely on social media. It showed one agent hitting David with a baton and another dousing him in the face with pepper spray. David suffered 2 broken bones in his hand. The only Native American on federal death row was executed today at an Indiana prison for slaying a 9-year-old and her grandmother. Many Navajos had hoped for a last-minute intervention by President Trump. Lesmond Mitchell was the 4th federal inmate executed this year. That means the federal government has carried out more executions this year than in the previous 56 years combined. Navajo leaders had said that the execution would violate tribal culture and sovereignty. Police in Belarus today dispersed protesters who gathered on the capital's central square, detaining dozens in an effort to end weeks of demonstrations challenging the re-election of the country's authoritarian ruler. The crackdown in Independence Square today came on the 18th straight day of protests, pushing for the resignation of authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko. The Belarusian leader, who has ruled the nation of 9.5 million for 26 years, has dismissed the protesters as Western puppets and refused to engage in dialogue with the opposition, contesting his August 9th re-election to a 6th term. After a brutal crackdown on demonstrators in the first days of post-election protests, which caused international outrage and helped swell protesters' numbers, the authorities changed tactics and let daily demonstrations go unhindered for nearly 2 weeks. The government, meanwhile, maintained pressure on the opposition with threats and selective jailing of its leaders. The police action today would seem to mark the return to force, although on a much smaller scale compared to the post-election crackdown, when nearly 7,000 people were detained, hundreds were injured, and at least 3 protesters died. Reporter Simon Marks has more.
On Tuesday, 2 protest leaders in the country were handed 10-day jail sentences for organising the demonstrations that have roiled the country in the aftermath of its disputed presidential election. Olga Kovalkova and Sergei Dilevsky are members of the National Coordination Council, reporting to opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is now in self-imposed exile in Lithuania. President Alexander Lukashenko is continuing to threaten protesters with a crackdown, and the jailing of the 2 protest leaders could be just the start of further legal action to come.
The members of the Coordination Council, they've been threatened on several occasions.
Professor Elena Korosteleva is from Belarus and runs the Global Europe Centre at the University of Kent.
What is happening in Belarus is nothing to do with geopolitics. It is neither anti-Russian nor pro-Western. People simply want change, and they simply want new government that would not be abusive, repressive, intimidatory, and would actually work with people to make the country worth living.
The European Union and the US have rejected the outcome of the election earlier this month, saying it was neither free nor fair. European Union foreign ministers are expected to sanction up to 20 officials from Belarus later this week. Simon Marks, Washington.
The United States has not conducted live nuclear tests for 28 years, but reports indicate the Trump administration has discussed restarting the nuclear testing program. That has Democrats from the areas impacted by past testing in Nevada and Utah pushing a provision in this year's National Defense Authorization Act to ban new nuclear tests. Nevada Representative Dinah Titus, who introduced the bill with support from Utah's Ben McAdams, said the provision would prevent the Trump administration or any in the future from using funds to restart nuclear weapons testing. Eric Tegetoff reports.
Restarting discussion about nuclear weapons testing is on the table in Washington, D.C., even as Idaho still is waiting for recognition of the harms from testing in the 20th century. Senior White House officials say it could bring China and Russia to negotiations over nuclear arms. And Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas won approval to add $10 million for testing in the National Defense Authorization Act for next year. But Hannah Smay with the Snake River Alliance points out that southern Idaho felt the health effects of fallout from Nevada tests of the 1950s and 60s.
Idaho has for a long time been a sacrifice zone for downwind contamination as well as a storage place for nuclear waste that comes with the production of nuclear weapons.
The National Cancer Institute has identified southern Idaho counties as having some of the highest exposure rates to radiation from Nevada tests. But the state wasn't included in a compensation fund for downwinder communities passed 3 decades ago. In eastern Idaho, the Idaho National Laboratory processes nuclear waste from across the country. Smay says before testing would restart, communities affected by nuclear testing should have a chance to speak up.
Having a lot of transparency from agencies, from the Department of Energy, from the Idaho National Lab, and from those in the administration who are floating this idea of resuming nuclear testing will allow communities to have their input.
More than 70 scientists and scholars have signed a letter urging the administration not to go forward with nuclear testing. And Massachusetts Senator Edward Markey has introduced the Preserving Leadership Against Nuclear Explosives Testing, or PLANET Act, which would prohibit the use of funds for nuclear weapons tests. For Public News Service, I'm Eric Tegedoff.
Morning clouds and afternoon sun predicted for around the San Francisco Bay Area tomorrow with highs in the mid-60s. Further inland, it should be sunny all day with a high of 90 degrees. In the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, sunny with high near 100 degrees. Partly cloudy skies predicted for Los Angeles with a high of near 90. Coming up next, Pacifica's coverage of night number 3 of the Republican National Convention. That's it for the news tonight for this Wednesday, August 26th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Miracle. Good evening.
This is a community announcement for August 2020. The Berkeley Flea Market has reopened and is available for scanning and shopping on weekends from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The flea market is located at Ashby Avenue between Adeline and Martin Luther King Jr. Way. For more information, call 510-644-0744. That's 510-644-0744. This community announcement is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your listing to calendar@kpfa.org or mail to 1929 Martin Luther King Jr. Way in Berkeley. You can hear this listing again at 510-848-6767 extension 621 or view it online at kpfa.org.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA.